G'day and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm your host, Ross Coulthart, and this week we're looking at one of the most intriguing UAP videos ever. Aguadilla, April 25th, 2013. Approximately 9:20 p.m. local time, Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, near Rafael Hernandez Airport. A US Customs and Border Protection aircraft using infrared FLIR, forward-looking infrared cameras, detects an unidentified object approaching from the Atlantic Ocean. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail of this whole saga because there are two experts who are going to talk to me all about it today. One of them is filmmaker Darcy Weir, and he's just been to Puerto Rico with Andy Marcial, who was his colleague investigating on the ground there, not just the Aguadilla incident, but a whole lot of stories about UAP sightings in Puerto Rico. But because of the expertise we need to talk about new debunking of the Aguadilla video, I've brought in also David Falch, who is a forward-looking infrared expert, and he's going to tell us why the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the Pentagon's UFO office, may or may not be right with its finding that these objects or object that was seen in 2013 were supposedly sky lanterns. Gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to Reality Check, and I'm looking forward to talking about what is probably, I think, one of the most important UFO sightings of recent decades.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to be here to talk about it.
So, Darcy, paint us a picture. Talk me through the Aguadilla incident.
So, I came across this video thanks to my friend Andy Marcial, who you've done an investigation over Arizona with, and the Department of Homeland Security footage or videos that were leaked through, I believe it's Bob, who formerly worked for that agency. And Andy and I became friends in 2023 when I was working on a story called Transmedium, studying UAP encounters or USO encounters around bodies of water around the world, and just kind of trying to get to the bottom of what this whole USO phenomenon is about, and if the US Navy is very aware, possibly even has a secret program called the Fast Mover Program, where they're cataloging and researching this stuff very secretly. So Andy brought up the Aguadilla footage from 2013, this incident where, again, Department of Homeland Security via CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, had recorded not just for like 10 seconds or 20 or 15 seconds, like the Tic Tac footage or, you know, the gimbal or go fast footage, very short clips. This video that was recorded with a very expensive, multi-million-dollar FLIR camera system was just under 4 minutes. So there's a lot of data to look at. There's a lot of information, a lot of things going on in this video for you to analyze, any analyst, really. And I heard through a researcher named Jorge Martin, who lives in Puerto Rico and has been a very proclaimed researcher in the field of ufology for over 40 years now, that he knew the leaker of that Aguadilla footage. So I made it my mission to fly to Puerto Rico with Andy. And as a team, we were going to interview the leaker and find out the backstory of how this footage came to the public and what happened after it came to the public. Just details that people might not have heard of before, And
Can I ask you this? Is it the position of the source, the primary leaker, and the people that were involved in the, because I know he's not the actual person who was on the plane at the time who saw the object, but do all of these Customs Border Protection people believe to this day that the object that they saw was indeed anomalous?
Yeah. So the individual who was the FLIR camera operator on the plane, the CBP plane that was in the air tracking this object, they informed this CBP leaker who was on the ground and walked onto the plane after they came back that there was this anomalous object in the footage that they had never seen before. And many of them in that agency and around that time were calling it a disc. They were calling it some kind of anomalous object that flew like a disc or an almond shaped object.
So let me set the scene before we go any further. To me, when I first saw the video, it looks extraordinary because the object appears to be speeding up. It seems at times to be maneuvering in and around trees and buildings on the ground near the San Rafael airport. And then perhaps the most interesting point is when it gets out into the ocean and it appears, at least to my eyes, to be going underwater. And it doesn't discernibly slow when it hits the water. We'll run video footage of what we're talking about here over this imagery, but it is extraordinary. It appears to suggest something anomalous. Just to set the scene, though, in March this year, 20th of March 2025, ARRO, the Pentagon's UFO UAP investigation office, declared with high confidence that the objects shown in the Aguadilla video did not exhibit anomalous behavior or transmedium capabilities. ARRO assesses with moderate confidence that the objects were a pair of sky lanterns. Gentlemen, do we owe ARRO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, Tim Phillips, do we owe them a grovelling apology for the fact that we've got it all wrong all this time?
Absolutely not.
Dave?
They owe us an apology for giving that explanation for what the object is.
Agreed. So, working with these systems on a daily basis, the first thing you want to do is rule out some kind of prosaic explanation. The bird, the plane, the plane, the balloon, mylar balloon, the sky lantern, any of these things, which I could do easily be just by doing tests in our backyard, because I work on these systems and I can just replicate, through experiments. And I did not find anything that matched up to this thermal signature.
So, Darcy, maybe talk me through why you think the object is anomalous.
Right. So, to give a bit more context, before they even started recording that video, they apparently had radar tracking of some kind of object coming from the ocean. So people within CBP were informing the pilots to look around for something. The pilots couldn't see anything with their naked eye. None of the personnel on board except for the FLIR camera operator, which this is a common characteristic of UAP or UFOs, that they can remain cloaked to the human eye. But in this far light, forward-looking infrared light spectrum, our camera technology can pick them up. And so when they did pick up this object, it was already starting to fly towards the Rafael Hernandez International Airport on the west coast of Puerto Rico.
But crucially, they saw the object coming in from the ocean, not from the northwest, as has been suggested by some people.
That's right. And they only started recording once the FLIR camera operator was able to actually start tracking it himself with the technology. So again, not with the naked eye. Then it flies in a circle. So the weird thing is that if it were a balloon, it would flutter, it would oscillate quite a bit, and it would come probably from the ocean. No, I don't think so. It would actually blow away wherever the wind is blowing. In the West, I believe the wind does come off of the ocean. This object flew in a circle and then went towards the ocean, which is going against the wind, in my opinion.
Dave, do you agree with this so far?
Yes. Again, I'm like, I analyzed the FLIR videos in their essence. I don't know so much of the backstory, but I'll take, his word for it. I'm just looking at the FLIR video from what I see from daily basis. I don't really get into the analysis of trajectory and parallax and all that kind of stuff, but I'm sure that Darcy knows what he's talking about.
Okay, so Darcy, the official line, I know Dr. John Kozlowski, when he gave evidence late last year to the Congress, he initially tipped that he thought it was either a balloon or sky lanterns. And I suspect that idea came from this report, which was written by a former Commodore in the Argentine Air Force called Ruben Leanza, who was the head of the Argentine Air Force's Center for Aerospace Identification. And he made the declaration that essentially everything that you see is consistent with it not being a self-propelled object, essentially a wind-blown object. And the thing that really got me most of all was he did some research about what conceivably could explain how the objects split into two after they come out of the ocean. And he found these heart-shaped balloons, which are released from a resort routinely, or were at the time released routinely to the northwest, or from the northwest, and it was consistent, he argues, with the idea of the wind blowing these heart-shaped balloons, which were often released. He applies the Occam's razor principle. He spoke to the company that does these weddings events on the beach, and he admitted that in the time period, it certainly was consistent with the time period when these heart-shaped balloons were being released. And so the explanation that he offered, and I noticed ARRO picked up on it as well, is that these were two heart-shaped balloons tied together, just drifting with the wind from the northwest, floating across the airport, and that what appeared to be going into the ocean, the explanation that ARRO offered and that Ruben offered, but ARRO particularly, is, and this is where you come in, Dave, because the color temperature of the objects, presumably sky lanterns, matched the color temperature of the ocean. And I don't know how that could conceivably be the case, because presumably a sky lantern's operating with some kind of a light or a burner of some kind. Surely that would emit an infrared signal. Because of that, they argue, ARRO argues, that this was just two balloons joined together and that they separated at the point where you see them supposedly emerge from the ocean. They never did emerge from the ocean. They were actually floating above the ocean. End of story. All resolved, case closed. Aguadilla, one of the most profound and interesting UAP videos of recent time, was in fact debunked. Are they wrong? Explain to me why they're wrong.
Okay, let's start off by talking about balloons. I printed out a little something here, just in anticipation of this. This, on the top side, you'll see like a daylight camera. You can see a balloon that's got red, white, blue, and a balloon at the bottom, which is a latex balloon. So mylar balloon on the top, latex on the bottom. You can see in the infrared image that the mylar is showing a whole bunch of different blacks and whites. It's reflecting its scene like floating mirrors, I call them. Down here, that latex balloon has essentially disappeared because infrared looks through a latex balloon. As far as sky lanterns, I've taken a thermographer that I have here and I've recorded them. I actually bought a sky lantern and I tethered it to the ground in my driveway and I recorded it to get an idea of what kind of thermal signature it would put off. And it's nothing like this. It's highly inconsistent of anything that they're referring to. So that's my assessment.
To add to that, I would say that if they were two balloons kind of tied together by string, we would see two balloons for the whole 3 minutes before it goes to the ocean. But
Yep.
instead, we see one object for 3 minutes straight. And only once it goes towards the ocean, as if it realizes it's being tracked by the CBP, and then splits and disappears from their tracking, that's where they come up with the theory that it's either two sky lanterns or two balloons. And
Do
I
you,
know that, sorry,
do you think the object went underwater?
I do, because, it seemed to do that. We have other footage that shows UAPs or USOs, going in and out of the water historically. So we have like the 2019 footage. What is that? The USS
Omaha.
footage, which Jeremy Corbell was a leaker of. You also have like another piece of footage that came out in 2021 from DHS, where a weird UAP is rotating just coming out of the water. So, and that's in Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico has a history of objects entering and exiting the water by the citizens there. And in this case, the CBP caught it, connected to DHS. It was reported. And in 2023, as I show in my investigation, DHS themselves released a report initially saying that this was an authentic UAP, among other UAP videos that they've scrutinized, analyzed. And these are intelligent people. They're in charge of securing borders and securing the coasts of the United States of America. They have state-of-the-art equipment that's worth millions of dollars that our friend Dave Falch here works on a daily basis. And these gentlemen, when they file these UAP videos into a WTF folder, they're serious. They don't understand what this is, so they call it anomalous, hence a UAP. So I just find it very interesting that one agency is calling it a UAP, and then ARRO is walking that back, calling it sky lanterns, balloons, anything but a UAP. And, Kirkpatrick has even called it two birds. Well, we would see two birds and what they look like in this high-powered FLIR system. You would see wings. You would see a shape of a beak. And, we don't see any of that.
I'll put a proposition to you. I think at times in ufology, there's confirmational bias on both sides. I don't think that's happening here for you guys. I actually agree with you, but I'm interested in going through the exercise. I think at times when some people who want to believe in the phenomenon look at something, they immediately default to an assumption that it must be anomalous. And I think the interesting thing is that on the other side, the people who are desperate to debunk the phenomenon, they seize on the first available prosaic explanation that might conceivably explain it and bang it together as a report, and that's the end of the story. I think in this case, I do err, and I've reached my own view on this by reading all of the reports, I do err to the idea that what has happened is the Pentagon's UFO Investigation Office has seized on the first remotely plausible prosaic explanation to try and explain this away as not anomalous, as prosaically explainable. Dave, let's ask you, what do you think? I mean, obviously, for me, the suggestion was made in the original SCU, Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAP report, which I thought was a very well put together report, that essentially the object changed course, it changed speed, it did appear superficially to be operating intelligently, moving intelligently. And the kicker for me, the absolute killer, was when you see it allegedly hit the water. I mean, certainly with my grade 1 eyeballs, I see something that appears to be going underwater. And then the weirdest thing is when it comes out of the water, it does appear to separate into two identically sized objects to the first object. So it's not diminishing in size as a result of splitting in size. What's your perspective on what you see as someone who understands forward-looking infrared imagery, which is what the plane was using?
To backtrack a little bit, I think your articulation of the two different polarities to believing, it could be a prosaic explanation, or it could be just, it has to be alien life form. I think you did a fantastic job explaining that. I don't know where I fall. I just look at the videos. I'm probably leaning more towards an anomalous kind of thing. But as far as what was your last segment you were saying there?
I'm particularly interested in whether you agree that the object went into the water. Are you able to reach a conclusion on whether the object entered the water?
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm full of thoughts here. So I'm thinking a lot of people were saying it's got to be some kind of artifact of the camera, or it's got to be some kind of reflection off the water. They're explaining it like that, but I'm tending to believe the video is what it is. Typically in FLIR, you see what you see is what you get. Every once in a while, there is something that's going to fool you, but what we're looking at is a good representation of what happened. And like you said, it looks like something went in the water, it came back out briefly and entered back in.
Now, just talk me through it, because we'll put this footage over the top of this while you're talking. The thing that really hits me, and I must confess, when I first saw Aguadilla, I was writing my book at the time, and I thought, gee, this is a really interesting UFO incident, because it's consistent with the idea of the Alcubierre drive, the idea that essentially whatever the physical matter is in front of the object, it's not disrupted by the movement of the object. You don't see any kind of wake, any kind of disturbance as the object moves through the medium of either air or water. Now, maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, and I'm the first to admit that we always have to guard against a confirmational bias. It's really easy to look at something and convince yourself that it's showing what you perhaps intuitively want it to show. Why do you believe that it is entering the water?
So there's no change in speed. And like you said, with the confirmation bias, I had some other techs join me that have the experience that I have. And we all kind of looked at the video because I wanted an aggregate. I wanted a bunch of ideas and opinions. And they all said it's not a Mylar balloon. It doesn't seem to, it's like the transmedium. It doesn't seem to be affected by any change from wind to water. That's one of the most bizarre parts about the whole video, besides the fact that it was splitting into two.
Can I ask you this dumb question? There's probably a very simple explanation for this, but my job is to ask the dumb questions and be the one that looks silly for asking them. So if it's a sky lanterns, as I understand it, they're a semi-rigid structure made largely of paper more often than not, and they have some kind of a support in which at the bottom you put a candle or some kind of burner that is emitting hot air that makes the object rise. That's a heat source. You'd surely see a heat source on an infrared camera, wouldn't you? Do you see anything consistent with a sky lantern heat source, like a small candle, on the forward-looking infrared that you see?
Not at all. It would show that heat source underneath, and there would be a difference in between the thermal signature of the paper being filled with a hot air, kind of like a mini hot air balloon. But you're definitely going to see the difference between that candle burning, hanging from its little wire suspension, and then the paper being illuminated. You're going to see gradients of black and white.
I would also say it's typical to see a sky lantern to rise only, and this thing is going towards the ocean, which is a colder source, right? How is that even possible? How do they explain that? They don't.
You're absolutely right, and I'm so pleased you've said that. That is true. I mean, I don't understand how they can conclude Dave and Darcy, I don't know how they can conclude, as they do in the ARRO report, that the colour temperature of the object is the same colour temperature as the sea, and that's why it disappears at the point where it looks like it's going into the ocean. It just doesn't make sense.
I mean, I could understand that if it were a bird, which we would see the silhouette and shape of a bird or two birds. And I would understand it if it were actually a mylar balloon, not a latex. But if they went with the mylar balloon explanation, perhaps when it goes over the ocean, the air within inside of the object cools down to the same temperature as the ocean. And then the MX-15 system, which is what we think this FLIR camera was, gets tricked and thinks it's following two objects.
I want to read you the conclusion that's made by ARRO, which is on the colour temperature. They assess with moderate confidence that the objects depicted in the video are sky lanterns. It's common practice for hotels and resorts in the area to release sky lanterns during celebrations. And he said, quote, IR signatures can appear to vanish when the thermal contrast between the object, presumably a sky lantern, and the background becomes indistinguishable. The objects seem to disappear shortly after the ocean appears in the background. The objects did not enter the water, ARRO says categorically. Rather, the sensor could not distinguish the objects from their environment due to a lack of thermal contrast between them and the ocean. Now, what Darcy and I have been discussing is, if you've got a flame inside a sky lantern, however you try and interpret that, that's going to be hotter, surely, than the background ocean, isn't it?
Oh, of course. A default for the infrared cameras is going to be an auto gain, auto level. So when you change from one scene to another, it's going to jack up the gains and levels and adjust accordingly. So if you have a thermal signature that you're tracking, like this one in question, it's going to kind of adjust the contrast. You're gonna see that particular object moving. And then if you see something hot against something cold, it's going to bloom out. It's going to contrast that particular object out to highlight it.
And it's funny because ARRO doesn't deal with that in its report. It just says that the thermal signature of the object was the same as the thermal signature of the ocean. Therefore, it didn't go in the water. I mean, isn't that an illogical assertion if the sky lantern, as appears to be the case, was being operated with a flame?
Well, yeah, they're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Again,
that's my view. That's certainly my view. So, Darcy, let's paint a broader word picture here of the context of Aguadilla. One of the things I love about your new film, which in all of this is featured in, by the way, and will, with your permission, use bits of your film in this. You and Andy travelled to Puerto Rico to essentially look at the phenomenon, particularly of underwater submerged objects or craft that appear to operate transmedium in and around Puerto Rico. What did you find?
Well, we found a lot. We found in this first sort of storytelling that I've done once I got back from Puerto Rico, the Aguadilla footage is incredible. It seems to be absolutely an object that many of the staff at CBP on the ground at the Rafael Hernandez International Airport in the Aguadilla area are very aware of. And after that footage came out, was leaked, the FBI was involved. They were investigating this leak, and they shut down access very quickly between the air branch of CBP personnel to other CBP personnel. I'm assuming like ocean-based or ground-based CBP. So the leaker was not allowed to ever go on to a craft and look at footage again, or go into areas where he could view this stuff on his friend's computer who worked there and caught this footage.
So
Um,
is it your suspicion then that the reason for the crackdown is because CBP and perhaps other government agencies were embarrassed by the fact of this leak because it did appear to show something anomalous? Is that your view?
Absolutely. I would say the footage is remarkable because it's almost 4 minutes long. Like I said, the tic tac, the go fast, the gimbal, these are short clips, and we hear about there being more of it, but the public hasn't been able to scrutinize that much all at one time. And this leak is a big piece of data. It's a big piece of footage that we're able to scrutinize and, try to figure out what it is. I think that's embarrassing for them to have that out in the public in the wild. And I think what's also embarrassing for them is that no one has a uniform explanation that can truly debunk it. Like I said, Sean Kirkpatrick, he did a analysis on a NOVA program earlier this year with the help of Joshua Semeter, who was part of the NASA UAP debunk panel from 2024. And they said it was categorically two birds. And when they, went to the ocean, that the sensor saw it cool, the birds cool down to the temperature of the ocean heat and temperature, and then the sensor lost it. Then you've got Tim, the director of ARRO, in I think the end of 2024, November 19th, explaining it as two balloons. And then you've got the official ARRO report saying that it's sky lanterns. What's going on, guys? Why can't you get your story straight if you're going to debunk this? So I just found the reaction from the DoD and the intelligence agencies afterwards, like in the past, let's say 6 months, quite remarkable. And then Puerto Rico, as an island that has a history of anomalies taking place, even back to the days of Christopher Columbus until now, every year people are saying that they're seeing anomalies around the island. And it's just going unacknowledged. It's very overlooked. And I think with my research, with the help of Andy Marcial and people like Dave Falch, where we're trying to scrutinize this stuff in like scientific and logical terms, there's got to be something happening around the island in the water that is highly anomalous. And I feel like they don't want us looking there.
So let's go through. I mean, one of the things I found intriguing, I didn't realize that the bottom, I think it's the southwestern tip of the so-called Bermuda Triangle, this supposed mysterious area of ocean where large numbers of planes have supposedly mysteriously disappeared, that Puerto Rico is in fact the southern westernmost point of the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, and the USS, I believe, Scorpio, which was a submarine, went missing in the middle of that triangle as well. They kind of touch a bit on that in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So this is a really anomalous area of the world, right? I think if you look at Lou Elizondo's story, where he talked about these Navy frogmen that were going off the coast of Puerto Rico to recover a dummy nuclear warhead. Apparently, an object that was black as the devil came from the depths of the ocean in that trench area and sucked this thing underwater. And the men who were in the ocean that were trying to investigate and get to this were climbing up a rope to get onto a helicopter that was taking them away as fast as they can. And apparently this video has been heavily circulated within the intelligence agency or the defense agencies. So it's not just Lou that's seen this. I mean, the Kitsukawa Maru is a Japanese freighter that back in the 1960s, or had that freighter tracked objects going in and out of the ocean, I think in the 1950s. And then in the 1960s, Mark D'Antonio, a astronomer and mainstream scientist that scrutinizes UAP footage, he is a person who called this object in the video, unfortunately, a mylar balloon, which I think he's wrong on that, but I respect his takes. Otherwise, he himself went and looked at UAP and USO specific history in the US Navy. And he got access to a report in the 1960s that a fleet of 4 submarines tracked an object off the coast of Puerto Rico, and they chased it to, mid-Atlantic. And it always evaded their, just as they got close enough to it to sort of detect what it was, it took off at high speeds, which back then we certainly did not have anything that went faster than 39 knots in the ocean.
That's actually one thing too about the Aguadilla object is physics would tell us that any object, any kind of craft that hits the ocean at the speed that that object appears to hit the ocean, it would discernibly slow down. Don't you think, Dave? Wouldn't you see a slowing down of an object if it hit a mass of water? I mean, any aircraft that I know of would blow apart.
Yeah, that would be my assessment.
So this is the thing that I find interesting about the way that ARRO has so quickly declared, quote, with high confidence, no less, that the objects were not anomalous or transmedium. It's almost like they're being in a hurry to resolve the issue, to get it out of the way, because this is, of course, one of the videos that most intrigues people when they go online and they're looking for credible UAP videos. And I think that's why it's so important for us on Reality Check and for other shows to actually take a closer look at the efforts that are being made to try and debunk a lot of these well-known UFO sites. I get the feeling at the moment there's a pushback by the intelligence community and the Defense Department to try and put all of this back into a box. And I guess I agree with you guys. The explanation offered by ARRO doesn't wash for Aguadilla. There are still so many unanswered questions. And I know the Scientific Coalition for UAP has actually gone back to ARRO and they've posted on their website more questions that they've asked of ARRO for them to justify their decision. Is there a broader issue here about Puerto Rico? You've mentioned there's a trench, and I was looking online. I've got sources who've told me before that there is suspicion about an enormously deep area of ocean just to the east of Puerto Rico, a massive trench that appears in the ocean there. Is that the area that you're talking about where a lot of this activity has been seen, Darcy?
Well, yeah. If you go to the east, there is the island of Vieques, and there's an old U.S. Navy installation there that was in service for decades. It's now been officially defunct, but people have stated that they've seen Navy activity around there regardless. Jorge Martin, he has reports that when it was active, there supposedly was a touchdown of a saucer-shaped craft near the beach, near the installation, and that supposedly the guards that gave him this testimony that were local Puerto Ricans working for the United States Navy guarding that base, they saw some kind of interface between occupants of this craft, which apparently looked non-human, and Navy-based personnel, high-ranking Navy, U.S. Navy personnel. So that was a strange story I heard about in the East. Jorge Martin has a book about that, revolving around Vieques and all the anomalies there. We've seen lights and objects disappear into the ocean there quite often. Where this footage was recorded, the Aguadilla 2013 video, that's on the West Coast. So I think it's safe to say that all over Puerto Rico, there are anomalies like this being recorded. And I'm just scratching the surface on it with my investigations.
In your film, the gentleman who admits that he's the one who procured a copy of the video and made sure it made publicly, you can't see his face, but you can see the back of him. It's pretty likely his bosses would know who he is. Is there any worry for his continued employment at CBP, or is he safe there?
He gave me the full green light to release this because he said it's important that people understand the true story behind how this video was captured, right? And then how he leaked it. Because he said before he even saw that video, he had seen objects himself around Puerto Rico, as well as heard fishermen's reports. And, obviously one of the main ways to put food on the table there as a Puerto Rican is to fish. You're surrounded by the ocean in the middle of it. So the reports he got from fishermen were that there were all kinds of objects entering and exiting the ocean, especially by the airport there on the West Coast. Those fishermen don't fish there anymore. So he took reports like this very seriously. And when he finally got this leaked footage, it was kind of just the cherry on top of it all for him. So that's
why don't the fishermen fish there anymore?
Because they're scared. They're freaked out about what's off the coast there near the beach that's right there by Rafael Hernandez International Airport. Apparently they see a lot of things at night.
So there's a couple of excerpts in your film where the fishermen seem to have recorded on mobile phones weird blue lights. But the one thing that blew me away was, there's no other way to describe it. It looks like something is intelligently moving through the water, semi-illuminated, and it looks, dare I say, semi-humanoid.
It does. It has the silhouette of, a round head and shoulders and, a torso and then legs hanging from that. I've had skeptics say that, that's just a scuba diver. But I've been scuba diving since I was 15 years old. I've got a PADI diving license. I've been all around the world in the ocean. I've been in Australia on the Great Barrier Reef there. And you wear a tank and you wear a respirator and a CBD, and you are constantly releasing bubble trails that rise to the surface. In this video, this whole clip, if people find it, which we featured and enhanced, you don't see any bubbles coming to the surface. And through the light, you don't even see the shadow of bubbles as if they would be usually coming from the mouth area of the head of somebody that's submerged. So that was highly odd to me.
What did the fishermen think they were seeing?
Something anomalous. You can even hear it in their voice. They're saying, look at this. What is this here? What is this here? Is that something in the water? What is that? They're literally saying something like that with a frightened voice.
They're freaked out. They're freaked out, basically.
Yeah. And I actually have kept in touch with Jorge Martin, who's a journalist that lives there. And he found the source of that video. And I'm trying to save up some money or find funding to go back and meet that person and interview them how they recorded that video.
I really actually commend, by the way, Darcy, the fact that you and Andy went to Puerto Rico and went on the ground to do feet on the ground research. It really matters. It's the sort of stuff that needs to happen, because it would be so easy for ARRO to do what they've done here, which is to issue a report which basically poo-poos the whole thing. Guys, it was just sky lanterns or maybe balloons. Don't worry your tiny little heads about it. Move on. There's a broader mystery here, though. That's what intrigues me behind the rest of your film. Your friend Jorge, he basically suggests that Puerto Rico is a hotbed for this kind of phenomenal material.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think he would concur. There's a very widely circulated story that in the forest in the middle of the island, it's called the Ajunque National Rainforest. There supposedly was a crashed craft, like a Roswell type crash that happened, I believe, in the 1990s, not too long ago. And this attracted the attention of thousands of Puerto Ricans. It was well reported. People were traveling to that area of the island to record and take pictures, videos, wherever they could of the activity around there. The forest service completely shut off access to that area. And apparently, NASA had a special type of radar plane that they were flying over the area for a matter of days, almost maybe a week. So that's a story I'd love to look into.
What
And
year
then
is it? What year is this?
I'm not quite sure. I don't have my notes right now, but I would say either 1990s or 1980s, not too long ago. And
There's another story I got told about involving Puerto Rico where US Air Force jets, one jet disappeared in an engagement with an alleged craft. Are you familiar with this incident?
I believe that's December of 1989 or
That's the one.
1988. Yeah. Again, Jorge Martin has a lot of information about that. And it was some kind of large object that two F-4 fighter jets were seen pacing and trying to ward off. And one of them apparently disappeared.
There is a witness. There's a
massive.
witness. There's a witness I've heard about who I've tried to find. If they're watching this, I'd love to hear from them. The witness is basically somebody who was at the base, at the U.S. Air Force base, or maybe it was a Puerto Rican military. I'm not sure the circumstances of how it was there, but essentially these two jets, the people at the base witnessed the loss of one of these aircraft.
Yeah. So that's another amazing story. Like there's constantly these cases that have happened around that island. And I'll bring up another one that I know of that's linked to the story that I feature at the end of my documentary, the first documentary I did on this island. And it's the case of Amaury Rivera, who also around, I think, 1989, saw a being near his car. He fainted, woke up. He believes on board this craft with a human-looking individual that identified themselves as non-human and was accompanied by what looked like grays. Okay, the stereotypical kind of alien gray. He told all of these Puerto Ricans that they had picked up about where he was from in space and why they were here. They want to help the planet, this type of thing. Next thing he knows, everybody's terrified, but they're kind of like frozen in their seats observing this demonstration or presentation. He's then dropped off, and he had a camera because he worked at a nightclub. He did cameras and photography for this nightclub and stuff in the West Coast sort of area of Aguadilla. He takes his camera out because he ends up seeing in the sky a massive craft being paced by F-4 fighter jets. And if you go online, you can look up these photos. They're encircling this massive object in the sky. Now, people have tried to debunk that. There's been deep dives. Amaury released a book. He's kind of gone into hiding. I've interviewed him, and I have the original photos. And people have said, "Oh, it's models being hung by a thread on a tree or something like that." But no one has ever. I think it was Bruce Maccabee did a forensic analysis of these old photos, and he could not see any signs of tampering. And again, intelligence agencies harassed Amaury for those photos. They went to his house. They tried to confiscate them. He hid them. But this is just one of many stories that have come out of Puerto Rico and have been overlooked.
Would you be willing to share a copy of the images of those photos with us so we can have a look at them here while you're talking about it?
I really shouldn't because
Oh, okay. But could you point us at least to the images as they appear online? I'd love to be able to show them to our audience.
absolutely, yeah, I have
Yeah.
the high res ones, but I'm not allowed to share them.
Oh, okay. No worries. But on the high-res ones that you've got, the original photographs, you certainly can't see any evidence of any kind of tampering or meddling with the photograph.
Nothing. And even in the original photos, you can't. People, one of the biggest skeptical arguments on the photos were that it was a hubcap from his old 1980s Toyota or something like that, that was thrown in the air, and they took photos of it, and then also had F4 fighter jet models at the sides at the same time. It's just ridiculous. Like, it's such an incredible scene. It would be so hard to fake that, especially back then.
So I want to come back for a moment because the purpose of this show, as well as talking about Aguadilla, has been very much to respond to an attempt by the government UFO investigation office to essentially try and debunk what is probably regarded as one of the more seminal UAP videos of recent time. I mean, it was only, 12 years ago that this incident happened. The technology that was being used was forward-looking infrared. And most people, myself included, when you look at that image of Aguadilla, it does look anomalous. So, Dave, you've heard, you're the FLIR expert, you're the guy that fixes these things and knows how this machinery works. Talk me through, before we go, definitively, do you think this object was anomalous? And if so, why?
Okay. Well, I'm very familiar with the cameras because we not only fix them and do all sorts of maintenance on them, but we also set them outside and we get a worldview scene, with the sunlight instead of the fluorescent lights at the shop. We stick it out there and we operate them for a couple hours and we look at birds. I'm close to a naval air station, so I see a lot of jets going by. I see all sorts of things that are in the air, and it's just a comparison. I see balloons. I see where somebody had let go of a big bunch of balloons and it's flying in the air, and I look at it because I'm bored. Look at it through the different cameras, and I get an idea of what they look like. Same with the mylar balloons, the latex balloons, all sorts of different objects. Anything that's aerial, and so I know it's just kind of an experience type assessment, but at the same time, I've been doing this almost 20 years. So it's what again, it's what you see is what you get.
So when you say what you see is what you get, talk me through what you see that object doing. Do you see it changing course? Do you see it accelerating?
So it's hard to tell from the movement of the aircraft because of parallax, but you see it looks like it's moving in kind of a linear fashion. It's not increasing elevation. It's not kind of drifting around. It's not floating around like a balloon would. And I would also consider it, that's kind of how a Chinese lantern would also move throughout a windy environment. So
It would oscillate. It would buffet around in the wind.
right. And so you'd see it kind of tilt a little bit. It just looks like a solid object with a little bit of a halo around it, which could be like an edge enhancement, like a feature of that particular FLIR system. But it's a solid object, one object that is traveling in a linear fashion. And then until it goes over the water and then enters the water, it doesn't look anything plausible that I could come up with. And I thought quite some time about what this could be. And, I also bounced this idea and other ideas off my coworkers who also have
Now,
experience.
to be fair to our friends from ARRO, are we being confirmationally biased here? We obviously perhaps intuitively want it to be anomalous, when we see the object apparently hitting the water and not changing speed, is it plausible to you in any way whatsoever, from your knowledge and understanding of forward-looking infrared systems, that what we're seeing is in fact two sky lanterns apparently tied together just above the surface of the ocean?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's completely anomalous, and again, it's just something that I can't explain. As somebody who deals with these infrared systems, the first thing I try to do is rule out all the prosaic explanations. What's the simplistic thing? Occam's razor, as you mentioned before. That would make the most sense. And I thought at first it might be a mylar balloon, but it just doesn't fit the thermal signature. And when it hits the water, it's a deal breaker. It's not a mylar balloon.
Also, might want to add that Dave Falch has a YouTube channel where he uploads multiple examples of what a bird looks like in a FLIR system like this, a mylar balloon, a latex balloon, and sky lanterns. I believe you do have those Chinese lanterns on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
What's the name of your channel, Dave, so people can go and have a look?
It's nothing special. It's just Dave Falch YouTube. If you just go to the YouTube channel and type my name in, it'll take you right there. Thanks for the plug.
Now, Darcy, no problem at all. And Darcy, what about your film? When can people see your film talking about what you found in Puerto Rico with Andy?
Right. So I also have a YouTube channel, which is under the name of my studio, Occult Journeys. I'm just going to release it there free for people to watch because I think it's an important story for people to understand and, learn more about this incident in UAP UFO history.
And you mentioned you'd quite like to get back to Puerto Rico. I always hope there might be somebody out there who might want to support a project like that. How can they get in touch with you if they want to offer some kind of financial support to help fund your next expedition?
Sure. Email is media@occultjourneys.com for my studio.
Well, I hope you get some nice benefactor who's prepared to fly you back there, because I personally, for one, enjoyed your film. Thank you for sharing it with us, and thank you, both of you, for joining Reality Check. I have a feeling that that's not the last we're going to hear from Mick West, ARRO, anybody else that's got investment in the Aguadilla being completely debunked. But I think it's a good old ding-dong, and it's good fun for us to be able to raise the issue and explore the ideas. Thank you very, very much, both of you gentlemen. And before we go, please don't forget to send in your questions for our weekly question and answer. You can email us at realitycheck@newsnationnow.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.